Hello there, and welcome to this second video looking at how to revise and giving you some few little tips of what to do. So today we're going to look at how we can revise ideas. Now, some of the problems that we get is that when it gets to the exam, students say quite obvious things. They tend to not think about the words to describe an aspect. So say, for example, they're talking about love and they talk about how there's Romeo falls in love with Juliet, and they just repeat the word love, 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 love all the way through. And that's what the question's looking at. So we need to think about that. And then with that, you can see that there's not much development if you're repeating the same idea again. So what we're going to look at is just seeing how we can improve that with our revision. So I've got a little question which hopefully your English teacher has shared with you at some point. So just a quick little question that we've got. Obviously you're going to have a bigger extract, but this one's looking at joy. And so what we're going to do is going to take you through how you could respond to this question and give you some ideas for it. Now, this hasn't come up in the exam paper yet, so it's a possibility it could come up. So if we take the question, what some students tend to do, and this doesn't quite work really well, is they tend to just go, right, okay, I'm looking at the theme joy, and I'm just going to give some examples. So we see joy in Tiny Tim because he's so happy, we see joy in Fred, and we see joy in Fezziwig. Now, at the moment, all that person is doing with those sentences is just finding evidence. That's what they're doing. So they're not really talking about joy. They're not really saying anything. They're just going, we can see joy in this, 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 and this. And what the examiner wants you to do is say something meaningful about joy and not just repeat the word again and again. And that's what we often see with some weaker responses when it comes to literature. They just repeat the same word again and again. So the best way to think of it is when you're planning, don't just suddenly go in and think, right, what are all the different examples? Have a think about the idea. What is joy? And do some thinking around it and have a think about any words or any phrases that you can think of in the story to describe it. So, for example, if we think about joy, now you could use phrases that you've heard of. So, for example, the joys of spring, or we could talk about a bundle of joy, which tends to be referred to as babies, doesn't it? But then we also have joy can mean excitement, it can mean comfort. Usually we're joyous when we're comfortable and happy, or we can link it into the opposite, misery. So if you're not enjoying stuff, then you're miserable, isn't it? But also there's a level of pleasure, and it's to do with how you feel and your well-being and your safety. So those are just a few things that we can kind of link in. Now, the examiner doesn't want you to just say joy lots of times. What they want you to do is kind of really think about this idea and think about, well, okay, what types of joy do we see? Well, we kind of see joy in the story around comfort, don't we? So if we think about in the story, with the Cratchits in particular, we see comfort around the Cratchits and Tiny Tim, and that idea that when the Cratchits are together, there is a family. They're really joyful. But then actually we see the opposite, which is Scrooge in Stave 1. So Scrooge is the opposite of joy, and the Cratchits are kind of the kind of the symbol of joy. And actually we want to be like them. And actually Fred is like that. And Fred is a bit like a kind of full of excitement, isn't he? Merry Christmas, Uncle Bar Humbug. And so we can see that these ideas we can kind of expand on. So take that a little bit further, and then we can kind of start forming into ideas. So we can think, right, okay, so, and we're going to add our own words. And a lot of the time you need to add your own words to describe this. So we've used some words to describe joy. So Dickens presents joy as infectious. So that idea that actually when one person's happy, it makes another person happy. Or we can say that Dickens presents joy as being centered around people feeling comfortable, self, and their well-being. So when people are happy, safe, and comfortable, they feel joy. Or we can think about this idea that joy maybe is something that can improve society. And so what we've got there are very, very simple sentences, but actually look at what we're doing. We're kind of rewording this idea of joy, and we're putting it in a different way. And we're kind of adding our own opinion. And we're saying, right, well, I think joy is infectious in the story. That's what the examiner wants you to do, and kind of pick up those ideas and work on that basis. So then we can take it a little bit, and then we can have a look. So let's say, for example, about how infectious it is. So if we look at the story in Christmas Carol, how it's cold at the beginning and it's warm at the end, and when the sun's out, everybody's happy, and Scrooge is happy, Tiny Tim's happy, Bob Cratchit's happy. It spreads, just like at the beginning. How Scrooge is miserable and how he makes Bob Cratchit miserable, and so on. So we can see that kind of thing. Then we can kind of look at how joy, being happy, is centered around comfort. Now, look at ignorance and want. Okay, poor, they're neglected, they haven't got things. Okay, they need stuff to make them happy, and they are miserable. They almost look like they're animals because they're not happy. Look at Tiny Tim. Tiny Tim, God bless us everyone, is really, really happy because he's got comfort, safety, and a family looks after him. So what we can see is actually in the story, ignorance and want and Tiny Tim show us those two ideas. And then we can even look at a bit further as how joy is something that can improve society. So Scrooge transforming and finding the ability to enjoy something means that Tiny Tim's life is saved. So actually, joy can make the world a better place. And that's what we've got in the story. So you can see, once you've got those ideas, you can start building them up. And what we've got here really are our 3 paragraphs. And then we can take this a little bit further and we can develop it. And we can say, well, why does Dickens want to improve society? Why does he think it's important that, around making people safe and happy? Why do we think those things? So you can see, by just breaking down the idea and doing some thinking, you can really help yourself with preparing for the exam. So let's have a look at some revision tips then. So quickly, so what can we do in terms of revision? So plan ideas. So what would you say if you got the theme greed? So what would you say? What ideas would you come up with? Think of what words you could use. So we can talk about greed, but we can talk about avarice. So we can talk about the greed for money, but also gluttony, the greed for food. So can we talk about that? Is there evidence of characters who've got the greed of food and not just money? Okay, I'm thinking of the portly gentleman and Fezziwig compared to Scrooge and Jacob Marley, who were very, very thin. And we can see that message that Dickens gives. But also we can look at the opposite. What's the opposite of greed? Well, the greed is a lack of, it's a need. So who are the characters that need? So we've got the Cratchits. And then we can kind of think, well, are there any phrases? Are there any phrases that we can use to kind of explain this idea? So one particular thing we can say is this idea that money makes the world go round. Is that the case of Christmas Carol? Maybe what Dickens is saying is that money doesn't make the world go round, it helps it move, but love keeps it going further. And so you can kind of be a bit more detailed and a bit more kind of fancy with your explaining ideas. And remember, ideas are not just rewording things. You need to come up with your own opinion and kind of think about it as your own kind of inference. What do you think? What word could you use to describe the story? Okay. Do check out our other videos and our YouTube channel. Okay. Hopefully that's been helpful. If there's any issues, do contact your English teacher or myself. Thank you.